just stick your dingus in this meat grinder. I mean, that would suck. If your dingus gets ground up, that's going to be terrible. And we're going to feel super bad for you. And they don't understand why young men go, piss off.
Another thing I wanted to talk to you about, just briefly touching on that podcast again that Andrew did with Fresh and Fit the other day. I found that to be very significant myself, because something that I always talk about with my guests is like the phenomenon that's happening at the moment with young men, because young men are feeling very disenfranchised in our culture at the moment. They don't really have meaning. And one of the things that Andrew spoke to the guys about was like giving a young man meaning. And I know that from my own life. Like I used to be like sort of just floating around in the abyss and was quite woke and atheist and didn't really have anything to sort of anchor myself to. And then when I was able to find like a direction and a path, it just enriches you as a man. So that's happening. And then people are turning to idols on the internet, and it's not necessarily the worst thing. I don't think it's good to idolize anyone. I think it's good to take different bits and bobs from lots of different people and see how you can sort of, like we said, synthesize it for your own life. However, one of the things that I like about Andrew, like what we were talking about before, is the idea of Christian ethics and the idea of actually striving towards having a family and marriage. But some of the tradcons don't really sell it so well sometimes, because they're just sometimes a little bit pompous about it maybe, and they don't really sort of go to the level of the modern man and go to the level of a guy who's like in his like mid to late 20s like me, thinking, gosh, this looks like something that I don't necessarily want to do. I don't want to have a secular marriage. And then when I heard Andrew talking to Fresh and Fit, and for lack of a better term, red pilling them about covenantal marriages, it's very appealing to me, because I think that there's a lot of guys out there who, in their heart of hearts, want to go towards a life of virtue and a life of family. However, because of the surrounding cultural factors at the moment, they're going more towards ideologies like a MGTOW, which is like men going their own way, obviously. And the like Sigma male. And I don't think that that's necessarily productive in the long term. If you're building a business, and if you're building as a man in his 20s and you want to take a few years and do your thing and get yourself to a point where you're responsible enough and financially stable enough to eventually have a family, I can get that. But I think that the goal, the North Star, should be to like eventually be a leader of your tribe. So if you don't mind, like just take me through little bit about, when you think about this issue, what do you think is the remedy for young men who are in this situation, haven't gotten married yet, and are thinking about their next moves? What should they be aiming towards?
Well, I like the word Andrew chose when he was having that conversation with Myron, because he said they need a mission, right? They need a mission.
So
and I think I
it's also very
definitely feel like
women find that very attractive as well. You know, they like a guy who's on his mission.
that's where the hero mythology comes from. That's what a hero is. A hero is a guy on a mission, whether it's like an anti-hero, like a Punisher archetype, or whether it's a Superman or a Batman archetype. The hero always has a mission, right? And the mission usually has something to do with defeating evil, lessening the suffering of people around him, something like this. And yeah, that's definitely what women find attractive. That's absolutely more than 6 foot, 6-pack, 6 figures, right? There's like certainly for me with Andrew, it's like when I think of him, when the first thing that comes to my mind is that hero archetype of a guy who his slogan, like personally on a personal level, what he'll say to people around us is he like, to me, what it means to be a man is to be a person that simply by being around makes life better for everyone around you. Whoever's in your circle, your friends, your family, your church, your community, your presence there makes things better for people, not worse for people. And that's how he lives. And he was like every other guy. When we first met and we were young dunderheads who had no idea what we were doing either, floating around in the abyss, he wasn't sure what he wanted to do either. He wasn't sure. And along the way, he figured that out. That somehow for him things clicked, and that's what he figured out, and he had something to fight for. So suddenly he started, really working his way up in his job, learning new skills, figuring out how to network with people, how to not just make like friends or allies, but good friends and allies, get into circles with men who were wiser than he was, had skills he wanted to learn, knew something he didn't know, that kind of thing, which is all kind of basic self-improvement stuff. But where I think it really becomes important is, yeah, what reason would you have to care about an ultimate purpose, about anything bigger than yourself, about future generations, about your grandkids or your grandkids' grandkids, if you are an atheist secular person? And this is kind of what a lot of people like you kind of like about Andrew, is that he has a way of explaining, look, this secular atheist culture that we're all raised in, this milieu we're all stuck in, isn't helping anyone. There's no reason for it to. You can't find meaning and purpose through that. You can get more chicks, you can get more money, you can get the Bugatti or whatever. But he gets letters from guys who say, I had all that. I had all that stuff. I've got money, I've got women, I'm good looking. He had a guy write him a letter and say, for the past 12 years of my life, I can't remember a day I woke up and wasn't disappointed that I did wake up. I didn't want to wake up. I didn't want to do another day. I didn't care about anything. And he couldn't figure out why he was so depressed. And, he was raised secular, was just kind of looking and found some of Andrew's videos. I think he found the Matt Dillahunty debate and something clicked for him. He started going to church, found a really nice lady there who he's engaged to. Now here's where Andrew and I and the TradCons disagree, because we often get lumped in with them. We don't really call ourselves traditional conservative, because I certainly don't, because for me, conservatives don't conserve anything. Like, as an ideology, conservatism was failed from the start, because it's like it sends people the message that we're just going to stay where we are somehow. And that's not really how history works. As a history nerd, right, I know you can't just be stagnant, but you also can't throw away all of the experiments of history that worked. You can't throw away the lessons of people that have stayed true throughout, millennia, and think that you'll be fine without it either. So I don't like the TradCon label, and they do get it wrong, right? Here's what the TradCons say, and it drives both me and Andrew crazy. They basically are telling young men, look, just stick your dingus in this meat grinder. There's only a 50-50 shot that it's going to get ground up. And that would suck. I mean, that would suck if your dingus gets ground up. That's going to be terrible, and we're going to feel super bad for you. But on the other hand, it might not. You might get lucky, and it might turn out fine. And they don't understand why this is not a message that's resonating with anyone. They don't understand why young men go, piss off, piss off with that. It's a terrible message. And, they don't want to change the system. They don't want to change family law. They don't want to, make a push to have marriage be meaningful and through the church again, and have it be something where, and people always ask how this works, so I'll do the briefest breakdown of it that I can. It doesn't have to be my church, although I do recommend the Orthodox Church to anyone who's seeking out there, because I believe it's the true church. But let's just say you're Mormon, or let's say that you are a traditional, Latin Mass Roman Catholic. Whatever it is, you could be a Seventh-day Adventist. You go to your church, just like they have their faith statement, where they say, we believe in these things. This is our statement of belief. This is our ecclesiastical structure. This is how we run our church. They would have something similar. And this is how marriage was done before. This isn't a new idea necessarily. This is how it was always done. You had an ecclesiastical court in the church, where here's what the church says marriage is. Here is the expectation. Okay, it's for life. Some churches, like a lot of Orthodox churches, want you to do premarital counseling first, so that both people understand the expectations spiritually, practically. You're getting some guidance from your spiritual father on what it's supposed to be. And then you get married. Well, now if there's an issue, you bring it to your priest. Why is this better? Well, psychotherapy and marriage counseling have an extremely low success rate. It rarely works. Can it work for some people sometimes? I guess, but it's kind of like Chinese medicine that way. It's like, probably not. Maybe, but probably not. Your priest, your pastor, your community knows you. They have a vested interest in your success. They want you to work it out. They observe your dynamic, especially your priest or your pastor is going to know you. And, if the lady has an attitude problem, they may know that, and they may be able to counsel her. If the guy drinks too much, or is kind of lazy, or he's not living up to his expectations, the priest can counsel him. They can sit with you together. You can work it out. Now, let's say that the woman just goes crazy and she wants to leave. Okay. Because this is people's big fear is like, but you can't make the woman stay, which is true. Now, if your marriage, your sacramental marriage through the church were to be dissolved, the woman just takes off. She goes, screw this. I'm leaving the church. I don't care if you kick me out. I'm going to apostatize. I'm going to run off with the kids. That agreement, whatever the grounds of that agreement are, would and could be enforced by the state in a scenario like that. So say the lady takes the children and leaves to go be with her boyfriend in another state. Well, then the state police can say, no, because this agreement says that the children belong to both of you. You don't have a legal right to abscond with someone's children, just like we do now. What you wouldn't have is a secular family law court, which I've written pieces on my Substack which explain how that got as screwed up as it is, if anyone's curious for that. But it wouldn't be where you go to a secular court that doesn't give a lick about whatever religious vows you made or whatever covenant you had or whatever agreement you were supposed to have before, and simply says, well, the children are young, so they should be with the mother, even if she's got a boyfriend in the house who's a dangerous felon, and even if she has no way to support them, and, you know, screw the dad's rights or something like that. So it would be something more like that. Mormons have, a lot of the Mormon churches have something like this. The Catholic Church traditionally always had this. You had to go to your priest and your bishop to be granted a divorce, and it was pretty rare and it was pretty tough to get. So if we went to something like that, of course, there's going to be problems right now getting the legalities worked out. That's going to be a tough battle. It probably won't be solved in my lifetime. But if we started pushing for this through the institutions, through the churches, number one, men would come back to the church. Why are men leaving the church? Because all they do is go on Sunday and hear from their lesbian pastor what's wrong with men and that men need to do better, right? So yes, feminism has infiltrated a lot of the mainline churches and it's a problem. My advice to people when they ask me what to do about that, if you're not going to a patriarchal church, if your church has female clergy, if they don't have like a patriarchal structure, leave. Number one, that's not a real church. There's nothing biblical, nothing historical. It doesn't matter if you're Protestant, Catholic, or Orthodox. There's nothing historical about females running the church and having authority over men, ever. That's a brand new thing. That's about 150 years old. I could tell you exactly where it came from. But leave that church. Find a church with patriarchs. Like in the Orthodox Church, our bishops, our priests are called patriarchs. It's an actual patriarchal structure. They're the fathers. They're responsible. The authority is with them, but the responsibility is with them, which is how I think it should be. So if you're in a mainline Lutheran church and you've got a female bishop, good luck to you. Good luck to you having a covenantal marriage or finding a woman who, even women in that church who tell you all day they're Christian, they believe in like a boyfriend Jesus. They believe in boyfriend Jesus who loves me just the way I am. I don't have to change a thing. I'm perfect how I am. Yes, queen, all that stuff. It's been very infiltrated. There are still traditions that have a patriarchy. Go to those, strengthen those. If all the men went to those churches and those traditions would be strong again. The Lutheran Church is dying. It's expected to basically not exist in about 20 to 30 years. And I think it's specifically because they've put women in charge of it. I think last time I checked, they had more female bishops than men. I can't remember if it's the bishops or the priests, but one of those classes, they've got more women than men now. So don't go to that church. Don't go to that church. According to me, that's my opinion.
I would happen to agree. That's pretty based that you reach for patriarchy. You love the patriarchy, and I can't help but agree. I think that patriarchy is also based. Before I said that women aren't funny, but the use of the word dingus is is something that we need to bring back. I don't know.
It's tough because I try not to be vulgar, but at the same time, I want to use plain language and get the point across. So I'm trying to walk the line, and it often ends up being funny. So
bring back the word dingus. That made me chuckle.
Well, the thing about patriarchy, the reason that's my handle, I want to bring that word back. I want to, they've totally graped that word and made it something it never was. Patriarchy is now synonymous with oppression and slavery. The word patriarchy literally means rule by the father.
Mm.
There's nothing about that that means slavery. There's nothing about that that means abuse. There's nothing about that that means oppression. And if you go back and read the writings of anti-suffragists who were much bigger in number than pro-suffragists, one of their reasons for not wanting women's suffrage and women's liberation was because they said, we're the primary benefactors of the
Mm.
patriarchy. Under male suffrage, we have been afforded a lot of comforts and privileges and luxuries that will probably go away if we become another political unit, if we are equal with men. Why would they not draft us? Why would we not just become another voting bloc that Republicans and Democrats are going to try to, get to their side? And they thought they would lose the moral high ground.
Mm.
Because think about women's issues back in the 1800s. Women did do some political activism, but how it worked was they would have like a ladies' club, like a local ladies' club. And that club would go to the local and state government and say, look, we need more clean parks that are safe for our children to play in. We need more clean water or milk. Milk at the time was a big deal because there were a lot of scam artists that would sell like milk that had chalk and water and things like that. Or there were, unsanitary conditions and they would say we need cleaner water, better sewer treatment, things like that. And they could go as a group to the political entities around them and say, we're asking for this because it's a community need and you're supposed to represent us and we're telling you this is what we need. And they loved that. And it was very effective. They got a lot done that way because they didn't have to form lobbying groups. They didn't have to line people's pockets with money. And they felt that it gave them a moral neutrality that other politicalized voting blocs didn't have. And okay, were they right? I think we can tell that they were right because ever since women got the vote, now when we have a political cycle, what are considered women's issues? When you think of politics and they say women's issues, what are the women's issues?
Abortion.
Abortion. It's mostly abortion. And then you might have a little bit of like, oh, we need to give women more business loans. We need to give them more scholarships because apparently we don't have enough women in college, even though women hold like 65% of all college debt now. Women graduate from college at a higher rate than men do. In fact, people don't know this. This is one of my little tidbits because if you ask people what they think life was like before suffrage, before women's lib, it was like, oh, they weren't allowed to go to school. They couldn't leave the house. It was like Sharia law and the women were just slaves and their husbands would just come home drunk every day and beat them. Well, that's not true. One of the ways we know this is they started tracking literacy rates among Americans in the 1790s. Now, in Europe, it's probably older. It probably goes back further. But here, the first census that tracked literacy was in 1790. And even then, more women graduated from high school than men, and more women could read and write proficiently than men could. And that's mainly because men were, building stuff and digging ditches and doing all the hard labor. So
Wow.
women were better educated 100 years before suffrage in both England and America that I know of,
And women
for
like
sure.
reading as well.
They do. We had great women novelists. And how do you think the first suffragettes got stuff going? Well, it's because they wrote pamphlets and they wrote books. Mary Wollstonecraft in the 1770s and 1780s was writing books and political tracts and giving speeches. She was having kids out of wedlock. She was having affairs with married men, traveling Europe by herself, and nobody threw her in jail. The patriarchy failed to correct her, apparently. If women were so oppressed, I'd like to know how it was that this woman was off doing all this stuff and didn't get guillotined in the French Revolution like most of her male counterparts of the time, didn't go to jail. There might have been a few people who whispered or gossiped a little bit, but that was about it. So this perception we have that there was like Sharia law in the West prior to women's lib is completely false. And I do take like a whole chapter in the book to debunk that because it's such a pervasive myth.
Yeah, my favorite part was when you went into chivalry. And it's like we kind of see this in some of the movies as well. We see the knights in shining armor and, the guys who are based on honor and piety and protecting women and all of the sort of pillars of chivalry. And it's like, that's all sort of designed to make life comfortable for women. And it's just this like medieval way that men and women truly knew how to coexist. And I think that I agree with you when you say that patriarchy has become like a dirty word, and it doesn't necessarily need to be. When I describe this, I talk, especially when I'm talking to young ladies on podcasts, etc. I'll use this analogy of like Pride Rock, of The Lion King, and everyone's seen The Lion King, and I'll say, when you look at Pride Rock, you see Mufasa. He's the patriarch. That's a very patriarchal structure. He's standing up top. But the reason why that patriarchal structure works so well is because Mufasa is that dude. Mufasa is a responsible, competent leader, and everybody just listens to him. And that's the ideal when we're looking at a patriarch. Now, it can go badly, obviously, if you have a guy like Scar who comes along. He's very sort of feminine and conniving in his temperament. But the ideal of a patriarch is like the order of the world. And a lot of these ideas get distorted. If you enjoyed that reality-based podcast clip, make sure to subscribe to the reality-based YouTube channel. We'll be uploading mini clips and the full podcast. And also, if you prefer the audible version, you can check us out on Spotify and Apple Podcasts at Reality Based.